following happened to me when I was 14 years old. My parents were having a date night and decided that I was too old for a babysitter and could take care of myself. I remember being delighted that I had the house to myself. Now, I was an awkward teenager with no real friends. I wasn't the type to call a bunch of people and have a party at the house or anything either. To put it in simple terms, I was an introvert and a geek. So my idea of a night to myself was very different than others. My parents instructed me to finish my homework and left a ton of sticky notes on the fridge that had emergency numbers and basic household rules scribbled on them. I watched them leave and then I locked the door and settled in for the night. I queued up a movie, made some popcorn, and found a few other snacks. I was totally absorbed in the movie. Of all things to watch when home alone, I chose a horror movie. Bad idea. Suddenly, I heard a noise from upstairs. It just about made me jump out of my skin. The sound was like someone dragging a chair across the floor above me. That was really weird because I was sure that I had seen my parents leave the house, and there was no way they could still be there. But maybe they had come home already, and I was just so into the movie that I just didn't notice them come home. Also, I did have the volume up too high, so that must be it. They probably even said goodnight to me, and I was just too zoned out to notice anything going on around me. I decided to check it out anyway. I went up the stairs towards my parents' bedroom to say goodnight and make sure I wasn't just crazy. With each step that I took, the sound of the noise increased. I gulped in my nervousness and noticed that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Now, I was standing in front of their room. The door was shut, so I gave a knock. Immediately, the noise stopped. I knocked again, but there wasn't an answer. Now, I'm starting to panic a little. I thought that there was a problem. I was quite naive back then, still thinking that it was my parents. I slowly cracked the door just wide enough to peek inside. The room was dark, but there was just enough light from the streetlight outside that I could see my mom sitting on the edge of the bed. A wave of relief washed over me, and I relaxed a little as I entered the room. I walked towards her, saying, "Hey Mom, I thought you guys left. I didn't expect you home so soon." Without turning to look at me, she said, "Come here, sweetie. I have something to show you." I stepped a little closer, but something just wasn't right. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands hanging at her sides, and her head leaning forward with her shoulders slumped over. Her dark hair covered her face. When I was close enough, she turned towards me just a little, and I looked at her carefully. What I had thought was my mom had red, glowing eyes, and the expression in them was one that I had never seen before. It was wild, almost non-human. I felt chills run up and down my spine and actually felt like I was going to be sick. Without hesitation, I turned as quick as I could and ran for my life. I ran down the stairs so fast that I almost tripped and fell twice. Once I hit the first floor, I bumped into someone and let out a scream that must surely have woken all the neighbors. Oh, thank God it was my mom, and my dad was right behind her. Looking really freaked out, they asked me what was wrong, and I pointed upstairs with a shaky finger. At this point, I couldn't form a sentence to save my life. Literally. They searched the entire house, more for my comfort than their concern, but never found anyone or any sign that someone had been in the house besides me. Of course they didn't believe me. They probably just attributed it to a temporary teenage hormone-induced psychosis. But I know what I saw. That night will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. I had been babysitting for the Wattersons for a long time now, but never for a whole weekend. They wanted to travel to the south for the weekend and wanted me to watch over their kids. I agreed because they were paying good and it was just for a couple days. On Friday night, I went to their house, which was in a ritzy area and a little isolated from the rest of town. It was a very elegant villa with long glass windows and manicured gardens, which I was sure must have cost a fortune. Mrs. Watterson gave me their cell numbers as well as landline where I could contact them in case of emergencies. They left and I got settled in. After dinner, I got the kids to bed. George was 8 and his little sister Janet was 5. They were no trouble at all and soon went to sleep without issue. Since it was still very early for me to go to bed, I was more of a night owl. I grabbed a book from Mr. Watterson's library and settled on the couch and started reading. I was halfway through the first page when my cell phone rang. "Hello," I said after I answered, but there was only silence on the other end. I said hello a few more times, but no answer, so I hung up. I started to read again. After a few minutes, I was startled by urgent knocking on the front door. I looked at the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock. Who could it be at this hour, I wondered, as I slowly walked towards the door. I peeked through the door's peephole. There was nobody standing on the porch. That was really weird, so I opened the door and looked around. "Hello? Someone here?" I called out. No answer. I backed away slowly and shut the door. I was beginning to get a really uneasy feeling about all this. My cell phone started ringing again, so I answered it, with an exasperated, "Hello?" Nobody replied. However, I heard ragged, heavy breathing on the other end, which sent my uneasiness to a whole new level. I started freaking out a bit as I asked, "Who are you? Stacy, is that you? This isn't funny." I really thought it was her. Stacy is my best friend, but she also loves to pull pranks on people. The breathing became more rapid and a little louder. I started to panic and hung up. Then I called Stacy, who sounded like she'd been asleep. I immediately accused her of calling me and trying to scare me by knocking on the door and ditching. "Quit acting, I know it was you," I said. "What are you talking about?" Stacy said. I told her about the strange calls and the frantic knocking at the door. She denied all of it and seemed to have no idea what I was talking about. As I was talking to her on the phone, I was pacing around the house and noticed the CCTV monitor. I stopped and checked in on the kids via the monitor. All seemed quiet and they were sound asleep as far as I could tell. Suddenly, a swish of black swept past the screen, as if someone had just passed in front of the camera. I froze in fear for almost a minute as I realized that it couldn't have been the kids, which meant there was someone else in this house. I managed to find a little courage and pulled myself together. I ran upstairs, calling 911 on my way, and barged into the mostly dark room. To my surprise, and relief honestly, there was no one there besides the kids. Cautiously, I headed for the closet on the other side of the room. It was difficult for me to breathe and my head was spinning. Gulping, I snatched the door open only to see that there was no one on the inside. But the window was open. Strange, because it was closed and locked before I left the kids' room that evening. I heard sirens approaching from down the street. I rushed downstairs to greet them in hopes that they could find whoever was messing with us. They searched the whole house, but they didn't find anyone either. However, the back door was wide open, and some of the plants in the garden just outside the kitchen had been trampled. The police called the Wattersons, and they rushed home as fast as they could. At that point, I was more than happy to get out of that house and back to the safety of my own. I had never been so scared in my short life, and I hope that I never feel that kind of fear again. This happened to me back in 2004 when I worked as a security guard in a theme park. The pay was crap, but jobs were scarce, so I did what I had to so I could pay the bills. I generally worked night shift because the pay was slightly better and things were busy enough that time seemed to pass a little quicker. The following incident happened during one of those shifts. The rides were running full tilt, and the park was alive with the usual happy screeching sounds one would associate with a fun, thrilling ride. Suddenly, the joyous sounds of the park guests were drowned out and replaced with ear-splitting sirens. One of the other guards indicated that it was a code red and that a lockdown was underway. Of course, as soon as the lockdown started, people panicked. We did what we could to gain control of the situation, but it was becoming more difficult by the moment. After about 10 minutes of the park staff and security trying to calm people down, an announcement came over the loudspeakers that the park should be evacuated immediately. This was really weird, and the first time this happened since I started working there. So the rides were all shut down, and we all helped guests leave the park in a safe and somewhat orderly manner to hopefully avoid a trampling situation. Once the park was empty, our security team and the rest of the night shift stayed in the park. We all went to our assigned posts, i.e., 2 of us were on each entrance, and 1 was on the grounds making rounds, looking for anyone who hadn't left the park like they were supposed to. I was stationed at Gate 2 along with another guard to make sure no one came back into the park. My curiosity about the code red got the better of me. I decided that I just had to find out what was going on. I'm a little nosy by nature. I told my partner that I needed to use the restroom and headed off to see what I could learn. I headed for the main security office where all digital surveillance was done, along with meetings, arrests, first aid, lost children, and announcements. This was also where the head of security was stationed most of the time, unless we needed help on the grounds. When I opened the door, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. Jackson, our head of security, was in his chair, his cold, lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling, his mouth hanging wide open, his skin deathly pale. From the way he was positioned, it looked like his neck had been broken. Horrified, I stood there, unable to budge an inch. I was totally in shock. Not like a teen being dramatic kind of shocked, but really in shock. After what seemed like an hour standing there, I realized that whoever did this was possibly still on the grounds, and could pose a real threat to the rest of us. I tried to settle myself long enough to pick up the phone on Jackson's desk and call the cops. I know I was rambling a bit to dispatch, but I managed to tell them what was going on and what I had found. They told me to stay calm and that they had officers en route. I unholstered my sidearm and headed out of the office. As soon as I cleared the doorway, a loud-pitched scream tore through the night. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. After a moment of silence, the music at the bumper cars started playing. Creepy. I ran towards the ride. As I approached, I saw that the guard who was supposed to be making the rounds was sitting in one of the cars. "Hey, Anthony," I yelled. No answer. He didn't move a bit. Once I got a little closer, I noticed that he looked just like the head of security. Pale skin, broken neck, and those cold, blank eyes staring at the ceiling. At this point, panic started to take over. I moved slowly through the park, totally out of breath, as if I'd just run a marathon. I half expected someone to jump out and attack me like the other 2 poor souls. Thankfully, I could hear sirens approaching in the distance. Somehow, their screeching along with the flashing lights gave me some comfort. Hopefully they could find whoever killed my teammates. The police searched everywhere and checked every person that was left in the park to make sure they were supposed to be there. But they didn't find the assailant. It was like the animal that did this had just vanished. All that was left to do was check the park security cameras. I was there as the police scanned the security feeds. They went through all of the footage for the whole shift. I wanted to find out what happened that day, but now I wish I hadn't seen what I did. We all watched in utter disbelief. As the head of security was making the code red announcement, his whole body began to shake violently like he was having a seizure. This went on for just a few seconds, and then, as if someone was standing behind him, his head twisted with a sudden jerk, and his neck was broken. He slumped back in his chair and assumed the position that I found him in. There were theories being tossed around about camera glitches, medical possibilities, etc., but nothing made any sense. I knew that somehow this wasn't just a coincidence or an equipment malfunction. I quit my job the very next morning. No amount of bills is worth my life.